This tells him exactly who built Stonehenge, and it is not who anybody expected.
But a huge leap forward in our understanding of Stonehenge.
Something strange is happening at Stonehenge. Scientists studying its ancient layout have uncovered a hidden pattern buried in the stones, and the discovery is shaking the field of archaeology. It is not just unusual, it is deeply unsettling. Whatever this pattern means, it hints at a purpose far darker and far more calculated than anyone ever imagined. And now, experts fear the truth might change everything. The Newall boulders and the secret of the Wanderer stones. Among the vast, imposing stones that dominate Stonehenge, it is easy to assume that only the largest blocks hold the monument's secrets. Yet one of the most transformative breakthroughs began not with a towering sarsen or a dramatic bluestone, but with a modest fragment almost overlooked by history. This was the Newall boulder, a rough, misshapen piece of rock so unimpressive that early archaeologists tucked it away without a second thought. For nearly a century, it sat buried in museum storage, catalogued but ignored, overshadowed by grander discoveries. At the time of its excavation in the early 1900s, archaeological methods were still developing. Excavators worked with limited tools and imperfect recording systems. Amid notebooks, heapings of soil, and wooden crates filled with artifacts, the small boulder attracted no particular curiosity. It did not resemble the great sarsens forming the iconic outer circle, nor did it match the eye-catching bluestones that defined the inner arrangements. To observers, it was only a coarse piece of foliated rock, faintly banded and sometimes catching light with a barely detectable shimmer. Nothing about it suggested significance. Yet this inconspicuous stone carried within it an entire story, waiting to be decoded. The Newall boulder contained tiny mineral structures and chemical signals far too subtle for early researchers to detect. Only with the advent of modern geochemical techniques did its hidden identity become accessible. When scientists finally subjected the stone to contemporary analysis, they discovered that it held vital information about one of Stonehenge's most vigorously debated questions. Were the bluestones transported deliberately by Neolithic builders, or were they carried naturally by glacial movement thousands of years earlier? For decades, experts had argued both sides. Some specialists believed that markings on certain stones resembled glacial striations. Others insisted that the stones were shaped, arranged, and positioned with too much intention for natural forces to be responsible. For years, the debate dragged on without definitive evidence. The Newall boulder would prove to be the missing link. Professor Richard Bevans and his team approached the mystery with scientific precision. They employed geochemical fingerprinting, a technique that reads the chemical DNA of a stone to determine exactly where it originated. Elements like thorium and zirconium, locked inside mineral grains, create unique patterns specific to particular geological formations. These signatures cannot be replicated or confused. They point unmistakably to a single source. When the Newall boulder's chemical profile was compared to outcrops across Wales, one location aligned perfectly: Craig Rhos y Fellain, a rocky, wooded landscape in North Pembrokeshire. The match was exact in every measurable way. The stone's composition, mineral structures, and elemental distribution mirrored the Welsh samples so precisely that coincidence was impossible. It had unquestionably come from that site. Just as important was what the boulder did not show. There were no signs of glacial transport, no rounded edges, no polished surfaces, no abrasion marks that would indicate grinding beneath a glacier. The stone's condition contradicted any theory of ice-carried deposition. If ice had dragged it across miles of terrain, the evidence would be visible. It wasn't. Instead, the surface remained sharp enough to indicate extraction by human hands. Supporting this, archaeologists working at Craig Rhos y Fellain uncovered clear signs of prehistoric quarrying. Hollowed recesses in the rock face indicated where stones had been removed. Wedge-shaped cuts revealed where tools had pried blocks free. Earth-built platforms suggested areas where stones were prepared for transport. Tools left behind hinted at organized labor, coordinated effort, and a community investing time and energy into a monument miles away. The Newall boulder, once forgotten, transformed into a piece of undeniable proof. It demonstrated that Neolithic builders selected specific stones from meaningful landscapes, transported them over enormous distances, and incorporated them into a monument that reflected shared identity, ritual intention, and engineering skill. A single overlooked stone reshaped the story, but the true giants of Stonehenge would reveal an even more astonishing tale of movement. The Giants of the Plain. Standing beneath Stonehenge's towering sarsens, it is easy to forget the extraordinary journey that brought these immense stones to Salisbury Plain. These blocks, so dense they can spark against steel, were not local to the area. Their presence is the result of choices and efforts that would seem nearly impossible for communities without wheels, draft animals, or metal tools. Yet the builders not only transported these giants across the landscape, they selected them with a clear architectural purpose. A major breakthrough in tracing the stone's origins came from an object missing for decades. A drilled core removed from one of the uprights during a 1958 restoration. At the time, workers extracted the cylindrical core to stabilize a leaning stone. One of them, Robert Phillips, quietly kept the sample and held on to it for more than 60 years. Late in life, he returned it, making it possible for scientists to analyze the interior of the sarsen, something that could never be done directly on the protected monument. With the core finally available, researchers used geochemical fingerprinting to examine the stone's elemental composition. This process identifies trace patterns within the rock, allowing scientists to match it to natural outcrops elsewhere in the landscape. Carrying portable X-ray fluorescence equipment across southern Britain, teams sampled sarsen-bearing areas and compared each reading to the chemical signature found in the core. The results pointed overwhelmingly to West Woods, a ridge near Marlborough. 50 of the 52 major sarsens matched this source exactly, revealing that the builders bypassed closer deposits in favor of stones that were larger, straighter, and more uniform. This selection reflects deliberate decision-making. The builders needed stones of consistent size and shape to create the monument's precise layout. Their choices show that they surveyed the land, evaluated the quality of different outcrops, and intentionally gathered material that suited their design.
Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge, the discovery shows that its construction was a far greater collaborative effort than scientists believed.
One exception stood out: the altar stone, whose chemistry indicates a distant northern origin, possibly as far away as Scotland. If so, the builders transported it hundreds of miles, a feat requiring ropes, timber sledges, wooden rollers, or water routes. Whatever method they used, such transport demanded coordination on a scale that would have strengthened social ties and shared purpose. Once the stones arrived on Salisbury Plain, they were shaped with notable care. Each upright was trimmed so its surface aligned with the lintels that would be set across the top. These lintels were then crafted with joints that locked them into place, a technique more reminiscent of woodworking than crude stone construction. From these shaped components, the builders assembled trilithons and an outer circle with mathematical precision. The consistency of the stones was central to the monument's design. Uniform heights and regular spacing created a structural rhythm around the circle and formed clean sightlines both between and through the openings. From within, the layout directed attention toward the trilithon horseshoe, where the tallest stones rose at the center, emphasizing important points within the structure. Nothing in the arrangement suggests improvisation. The placements were carefully planned. Researchers later recognized that the pattern created by the Sarsens seemed to reflect cycles of time. The number of stones, the repeated intervals, and the structured spacing hint at a connection to days, seasons, or celestial markers. Neolithic communities lived by seasonal rhythms, planting, harvesting, and gathering, long before written calendars existed. For them, the sun's movement set the framework for survival. A monument that mirrored these natural cycles would have served as a guide for rituals and seasonal activity. When viewed alongside the sky, the monument's intentions become clearer. Openings between stones frame pathways for sunlight, and the towering trilithons point toward significant positions on the horizon. Intentional gaps direct light in controlled ways, creating predictable visual effects during certain times of the year. These features show that the structure interacted with celestial events, transforming the stones into markers of time and anchoring the monument to the natural world. Rather than serving only as a ceremonial gathering place, Stonehenge functioned as a system that connected sky, season, and community. The arrangement's purpose extended beyond ritual, forming a physical expression of how the builders understood time, alignment, and meaning. Through their selection, transport, shaping, and placement of the Sarsens, the builders demonstrated a level of cooperation and intention that reshaped both landscape and culture. These stones, true giants of the plain, stand today as evidence of a society capable of extraordinary planning, shared identity, and architectural vision. The monument they created continues to inspire wonder, offering a window into a world where engineering, symbolism, and celestial order came together in enduring stone.
Every year, 1 million people descend on Stonehenge. They ask the age-old questions about this mysterious monument. Who built it? How was it built? And why?
Patterns in stone hinted at a grander system, one that would reveal Stonehenge as a monumental instrument tracking the sun. The solar code, Stonehenge as a perpetual calendar. The idea that Stonehenge was built with the sun in mind has circulated for centuries, but recent interpretations push far beyond the well-known solstice alignments. Archaeologist Timothy Darville proposes that Stonehenge is not simply oriented toward significant solar events. It is an enormous, purpose-built calendar carved directly into the landscape. According to his work, the monument encodes a full 365 1/4-day solar year in its stones, making it one of the earliest large-scale timekeeping systems ever constructed. Darville's argument begins with the Great Sarsen Circle, the most visually recognizable element of Stonehenge. The 30 uprights that form this ring, he suggests, are intentional in number and meaning. Instead of representing a symbolic enclosure, these stones may stand for a 30-day month. Within the circle, 2 of the uprights differ subtly in shape from the rest, and their positions appear deliberate rather than accidental. Darville interprets these distinctive stones as markers dividing each month into 3 equal units of 10 days. In other words, every month structured within Stonehenge would consist of 3 repeating 10-day blocks, creating a clear and regular rhythm. Extrapolated across a full year, 12 such months produce 360 days. Many ancient cultures structured their calendars this way, supplementing the core cycle with additional days set aside for rituals or seasonal observances. At Stonehenge, Darville identifies these extra days in the massive trilithon horseshoe standing at the monument's center. The 5 great trilithons, towering 3 stone doorways arranged in a U-shaped arc, could represent the 5 epigomenal days needed to complete the year. Positioned at the heart of the structure, they would serve as markers for days outside the normal sequence, known elsewhere in antiquity as days of transition, ceremony, or renewal. However, a solar year is not exactly 365 days, but 365 1/4. Any long-term calendar must account for the additional quarter day to avoid drifting out of alignment. Darville sees the solution encoded in the 4 station stones positioned around the outer perimeter. These stones form a precise rectangle whose alignments, he argues, could have been used to determine when the extra leap day adjustment was necessary. Observers paying close attention to the sun's rising and setting positions relative to these stones could recognize the year when the correction was due, keeping the calendar synchronized with the true solar cycle. Even without accepting the full numerical model, Stonehenge's astronomical precision cannot be ignored. The famous alignment with the midsummer sunrise, framed by the distant heel stone, and the midwinter sunset, dropping between the tallest trilithons, demonstrates a deep and intentional engagement with celestial motion. Such alignments demanded careful planning, clear sight lines, and exact placement of stones weighing 20 tons or more. This level of accuracy indicates that the builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of the solstices and the sun's yearly path across the horizon. Not all researchers accept Darville's interpretation. Some argue that the calendar model relies on numerical patterns that might be coincidental rather than deliberate. Others suggest that Stonehenge was multifunctional. Instead of being solely a calendar, it may have served as a ceremonial center, a burial place, a site of gathering, and an astronomical marker all at once. In this view, its alignments express symbolic meaning rather than timekeeping precision. There is also the unresolved question of the moon. The possibility that Stonehenge acknowledged rare lunar standstill positions, events that occur roughly every 18.6 years, when the moon reaches its extreme rising and setting points, adds complexity to any interpretation. 2 of the original station stones align with these lunar extremes, and some early burials correspond with these directions. Whether the builders intended this, or whether the alignment was later incorporated into ritual practice, remains a matter of debate, but the coincidence is difficult to ignore. For the Neolithic communities who constructed Stonehenge, time was not an abstract measurement. It governed survival, when to plant crops, when to slaughter animals, when to travel, when to gather, and when to honor ancestors. By embedding celestial cycles into its stones, Stonehenge created a place where the rhythms of the year could be anchored in enduring architecture.
This period of development produced a monument much like what we see today, including astrological alignments to key solar events. However, no sooner had this phase been completed when major changes started to occur across the British Isles.
Whether functioning as a precise calendar, a symbolic observatory, or a structure that bridged several roles at once, Stonehenge tied the movement of the sky directly to the organization of society. If sunlight shaped Stonehenge's purpose, sound shaped its experience, and the monument's hidden acoustics revealed yet another dimension of design. The sound chamber, Stonehenge's hidden acoustics. Although Stonehenge is usually imagined as a place defined by silence and stillness, recent research suggests that its builders may have crafted it with sound in mind, as carefully as they designed its solar alignments. A monument long interpreted visually turns out to possess a distinctive acoustic identity, one that would have shaped the sensory experience of anyone who stepped into its ring of stones. This idea gained momentum when a team from the University of Salford set out to reconstruct Stonehenge not as a digital model, but as a physical, acoustically accurate miniature. Because the monument today is incomplete, with many stones collapsed or missing, researchers needed a way to test how it would have sounded when fully intact around 2500 BCE. Using ultra-high-resolution laser scans from historic England, they captured every surviving contour of the stones still standing. These scans revealed the precise angles, curves, and irregularities of each surface, details essential for understanding how sound interacts with stone. Next, the team rebuilt all the missing stones digitally and then printed the entire monument at 1/12 scale. This model, affectionately called Mini-Henge, included 157 stones, every upright, lintel, and lost block restored to its original location. Each miniature stone was coated with a material engineered to mimic the acoustic properties of real sarsen rock, ensuring that the model didn't just look like Stonehenge, but behaved like it acoustically. Mini-Henge was placed inside a specialized acoustic chamber where the team could control every variable. Because the model was 12 times smaller than the real structure, any sound played into it had to be increased to 12 times the usual frequency. This shifted the audio into the ultrasonic range, beyond human hearing, but still measurable using sensitive equipment. Tiny speakers and microphones were positioned inside and around the model, allowing researchers to map exactly how sound reflected, strengthened, or faded within and beyond the stone circle. The results were remarkable. Instead of dissipating into open air, sound inside the monument was noticeably amplified. The stones acted like vertical reflectors, trapping audio waves and redirecting them horizontally across the space. Voices or instruments placed at the center would have sounded clearer and louder to those inside the ring, even with minimal effort. Conversations or chants projected outward, bouncing across the stones in a way that created an enriched auditory experience. But that effect almost entirely disappeared outside the circle. As soon as sound attempted to move past the stone boundary, it dramatically weakened. Words spoken at the center became muffled at the perimeter and nearly inaudible beyond it. The monument behaved like a kind of acoustic bubble, a space that could carry sound beautifully inward, but resisted letting it escape. This separation between inside and outside would have given rituals a sense of secrecy or exclusivity. Those standing within the ring would have heard chants, drumming, or spoken words with powerful clarity, while those beyond the stones would have perceived only faint traces. To participants, the stone circle would have felt immersive, surrounding them not only physically but aurally. To observers outside, it would have seemed distant and mysterious. Importantly, the researchers discovered that this acoustic behavior remained relatively stable even when they tested different historical arrangements based on archaeological phases. Whether stones were added, removed, or reconfigured in ways believed to reflect earlier layouts, the sound environment changed less than expected. This suggests that although astronomy likely drove the monument's overall orientation, its acoustic qualities were either an intentional consideration or a highly valued incidental effect. Hints of Stonehenge's acoustic character persist today. On windy days, some visitors report faint tonal hums created as the air moves through gaps in the stones. A few smaller stones, especially those known as ringing stones, produce metallic or bell-like tones when struck, an unusual property that researchers from the Royal College of Art once demonstrated by playing them like a prehistoric xylophone. These sonic qualities may not have been the monument's primary purpose, but they reveal that its builders lived in a world where sound, rhythm, and resonance held profound significance. Taken together, the evidence suggests that Stonehenge was not merely a visual or astronomical monument. It was a crafted sensory environment, a place where sound interacted with structure to shape experience. Before science explained these acoustic wonders, legends offered their own answers, stories filled with giants, magic, and a powerful wizard. Legends of power, Merlin and the magical origins of Stonehenge. Long before archaeology provided scientific tools to study Stonehenge, the monument existed in a realm shaped by storytelling, imagination, and medieval belief. Among all the myths that tried to explain its origins, none held more influence than the legend involving Merlin, the powerful wizard of Arthurian tradition. In medieval literature, most notably in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, Stonehenge was not raised by human labor at all. Instead, it was created through the magical intervention of Merlin, a figure who could command nature, harness supernatural forces, and move stone as effortlessly as a soldier moves a shield. Geoffrey's story begins with a moment of deep tragedy. After a brutal massacre in which British nobles were treacherously slain by invading Saxons, King Aurelius Ambrosius sought a monument that could honor the dead in a manner worthy of their sacrifice. He wanted something permanent, something infused with meaning, something that ordinary builders could never hope to create. A simple structure built with the hands of craftsmen would not satisfy the magnitude of the loss. The king needed a memorial that would stand apart from anything seen before. This is where Merlin entered the tale. When approached for guidance, Merlin proposed an astonishing idea. Across the sea in Ireland, he explained, stood a circle of massive stones known as the Giant's Dance. These stones were not ordinary megaliths, they were believed to possess mystical and medicinal powers. According to Merlin's account, ancient giants had once transported the stones from Africa and erected them in Ireland. They had used them for sacred stone baths, believing the stones could heal wounds and cure sickness. These qualities made the monument more than a structure. It was a relic of immense spiritual and physical power. King Aurelius, intrigued yet skeptical, questioned how anyone could possibly move such enormous stones. Merlin's answer was simple: leave the task to him. To retrieve the monument, the king sent his brother, Uther Pendragon, to Ireland with an army of 15,000 men. The Britons battled King Gilmorius of Ireland, and after a fierce conflict, they emerged victorious. Yet even with victory secured, they found themselves unable to move the gigantic stones. Their size and weight made them impossible to lift or transport by ordinary means. That was when Merlin demonstrated the full extent of his legendary abilities. Using his magical knowledge, and in Geoffrey's telling, a blend of sorcery and engineering, he accomplished what armies could not. He lifted the colossal stones, transported them across the sea, and reassembled the entire formation on Salisbury Plain.
Geoffrey of Monmouth writes the story of how King Aurelius' soldiers who had fallen in battle fighting the Saxons. The stones can only be moved through the artifice of the wizard Merlin to Salisbury. Today, those stones are known as Stonehenge.
Every stone was placed with intention, arranged with the same pattern and design that had once stood in Ireland. According to the legend, this act of supernatural power created the Stonehenge that still stands today. In Geoffrey's retelling, the myth serves multiple purposes. It elevates Britain's past, blending folklore, politics, and cultural identity into a single dramatic narrative. The idea of transporting stones across vast distances, a feat that echoes real prehistoric achievements like the movement of blue stones from Wales, is transformed into a grand, magical undertaking. Practical engineering is reimagined as wizardry, and physical labor becomes a supernatural act. In this way, Geoffrey's story reshapes history into legend, creating a version of Stonehenge's origins that highlights Britain's mythical grandeur. Merlin himself becomes a bridge between reality and fantasy. He occupies a symbolic space between magician and problem solver. He does not merely use spells, he provides a solution to what medieval people believed was an impossible mechanical challenge. The legend quietly acknowledges human ingenuity, yet frames that ingenuity in the language of enchantment. Uther's military expedition also becomes more than a simple mission. It becomes a statement of authority and national strength, reinforcing a political message about Britain's power and legacy. The endurance of this myth reveals why it took hold so firmly. For people who lived centuries before scientific archaeology, the monument's scale and precision defied explanation. Magic became the most reasonable answer. The story tied healing, ritual, conquest, and supernatural power into one unforgettable tale, giving Stonehenge a place not just in history, but in imagination. Even today, the shadow of Merlin's legend lingers, shaping how people picture the monument, a link between prehistoric labor, medieval storytelling, and the awe Stonehenge still inspires.
Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge. And it suggests that mysteries that shroud this region are bigger than many of us even thought.
But once the myths faded, the stones faced real danger, centuries of human damage leaving wounds far deeper than any legend described. The silent wounds. Centuries of vandalism and modern threats. Across thousands of years, Stonehenge has resisted weather, shifting soil, and the passage of time. Yet, the most persistent threats to the monument have come from people themselves. Long before it was considered a site worth protecting, locals treated the stones as a convenient source of building material. Throughout the medieval and early modern periods, fragments were chipped off or hauled away, quietly vanishing into nearby houses, farm walls, and roads. By the 1600s, large pieces were already missing, their removal recorded in early drawings that show stones no longer standing today. The damage continued into the 1800s, when visitors routinely broke off small chunks as keepsakes. Each little souvenir seemed harmless at the time, but every fragment taken was a piece of the monument's irreplaceable past. Human pressure grew even more in the 20th century. In the 1970s, Stonehenge became a gathering point for the annual Free Festival on Salisbury Plain. At first, the crowds seemed manageable, but as the festival grew, so did the damage. By 1978, the situation had become so destructive that authorities finally erected fencing around the stones. The following years brought new incidents. Vandalism occurred in multiple forms, including a notorious attack in 1984 in which several stones were sprayed with purple paint. Patrols, barriers, and temporary closures were introduced to protect what remained. Even these measures could not eliminate harm. In 2018, 2 men managed to break off a piece of the heel stone no larger than a coin, the first physical damage in decades. Then came a different kind of threat: modern development. In 2020, a proposal to build a tunnel near Stonehenge sparked public outrage. Critics argued that the plan endangered the surrounding archaeological landscape. Among the most vocal opponents was historian Tom Holland, who described the plan as an act that would cause irreversible harm. More recently, activism added to the site's troubles. In June 2024, members of Just Stop Oil threw orange cornflower powder across 3 monoliths. Fortunately, the powder washed away without leaving permanent marks, but the incident highlighted how vulnerable the monument remains despite layers of security. Today, Stonehenge appears incomplete, a ring once whole now broken. Some stones fell naturally, weakened by time and gravity. Others were removed or toppled by humans across centuries. Because of this long history of disturbance, archaeologists rely heavily on early sketches, surveys, and photographs to reconstruct its original layout. Yet even these records suggest that the monument may never have been completely finished. Gaps in the outer circle, incomplete alignments, and uneven construction phases imply that building may have halted earlier than planned. Changes in belief systems, social structures, or priorities could have caused construction to stop. Evidence from the Bronze Age shows a decline in activity at the site, suggesting that its significance may have shifted as societies evolve. Stonehenge also functioned as a burial ground. Excavations uncovered hundreds of cremated remains, the largest collection from Neolithic Britain, clustered around specific stones and set within the monument's carefully aligned architecture. The placement of burials appears linked to solstice orientations, especially the winter sunset. For the people who built Stonehenge, this connection between the ancestors and the setting midwinter sun represented a cycle of death and renewal embedded directly into the landscape. By the beginning of the 1900s, Stonehenge was in critical condition. Several stones leaned at dangerous angles, supported only by timber props, and the ground around them had eroded severely. Still privately owned by the Antrobus family, the estate was sold at auction in 1915. Cecil Chubb, attending the auction by chance, purchased the site. 3 years later, he and his wife Mary gifted Stonehenge to the nation. This act finally opened the door to restoration. Archaeologists and engineers straightened leaning stones, re-erected fallen ones, and stabilized the surrounding terrain. English Heritage credits the Chubbs with rescuing the monument from collapse. Yet the threats continue. Climate change, erosion, and the constant pressure of thousands of visitors each year require ongoing conservation. Access is now carefully managed through designated paths and controlled movement, an effort to balance public engagement with preservation. The tension between protecting the monument and allowing people to experience it remains a central challenge. Despite the scars left by centuries of damage, Stonehenge endures as more than a ruin. Its power lies in what happens inside the circle, the solar alignments, the acoustics shaped by stone, and the layers of memory and meaning that still resonate. Even with its wounds, Stonehenge continues to function as a cosmic instrument, a ritual space, and a link to the ancestors who once gathered there. Stonehenge endures as a fusion of memory, science, and ancient imagination. Its stones still align, resonate, and provoke wonder. After everything we now know, what secrets might still lie waiting in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below.